Welcome to the Business Summer Series. I'm Alicia Barry. The international border is open, offering Australians the chance to reconnect with family and friends. But with new COVID variants emerging, regulation is constantly changing, so research is key. While most insurers offer travel policies that contain COVID coverage, consumers are being warned that the fine print may contain some big exclusions, as Amelia Terzon has been finding out. After several lockdowns, Beth and Larry Lee are finally going overseas.
This is going to be fun, man.
How old is she?
She's 18 months.
They're heading to San Francisco to meet their grandchild Emma for the first time.
Look at that smile. I'm the kind of person that watches people at airports and cries when other people, come in. So really excited and a little nervous.
If something happens and we're stuck over there, we might end up in a hospital.
The Lees have bought travel insurance for almost $700. It covers some pre-existing medical conditions and an important extra.
We went with a company that gave us supplementary policy that covers us for COVID if we're diagnosed before we leave and while we're there, and if travel plans have to change.
Yep.
So that's good.
The policy is void if the Australian government's travel advice changes, and while it covers the Lees if they get COVID, it won't cover their costs if they are impacted by a lockdown.
At this stage, we've not seen any travel insurer that has included cover if you need to cancel because of a border closure.
The boss of insurance company NIB says he doesn't expect this sort of coverage to be offered.
It's not an insurable risk if the entire world shuts down and closes borders. The consequences, financial consequences, are just too dire.
NIB had to change underwriters during the pandemic.
Travel insurance is not the most popular category for global insurers at the moment, for obvious reasons. Frankly, we've had to scramble to establish a new underwriting partnership.
Qantas and Flight Centre are also selling travel insurance with ticket sales again. Their policies are backed by NIB and Covermore. And again, they offer limited coverage if you get stuck in a lockdown in most overseas locations.
Choice are hopeful that some travel insurers in Australia will come to the table and provide some kind of cover for lockdowns.
Without that sort of cover, Beth and Larry Lee are feeling cautious. The retired teachers have spent $10,000 on their trip and some costs aren't refundable. While travellers like Larry and Beth have managed to find insurance that covers them somewhat for COVID, there is all other sorts of travel insurance, including the type that's tacked onto credit cards, and the fine print for that is even more complicated. The Big Four banks' free travel insurance products exclude pandemics.
Whether it's a click box on a flight booking screen or whether you have credit card travel insurance, you really need to still read it and know whether you're going to be covered specifically for COVID. Especially with the credit card travel insurance.
Consumer advocates say it's a buyer beware situation, but that is not stopping Beth and Larry Lee's family reunion.
We love to travel, so we won't stop travelling. We're aware of the fact that your travel plans can be upended at any time.
A risk that many Australians are willing to take. A recovery is in sight for the airline industry. Passenger revenue is set to double in 2022 from the lows of 2020, according to the International Air Transport Association. Domestic travel is set to dominate as travellers approach long haul with caution. For more on what's in store, I'm going to speak with the boss of Virgin, Jayne Hrdlicka. Jayne Hrdlicka, thanks for chatting with me.
Pleasure. It's great to be here.
There's a bit more work to do for travellers before they board. What do they have to do?
It's actually pretty straightforward. There are a few little extra steps, which just mean you need to be organised. Make sure you've got your vaccine certificate ready to go. Make sure you've got your mask, and then have a negative PCR test before you come to the airport.
So it's mandatory for travellers to be vaccinated before they get on a flight, but kids under 12 are exempt.
That's correct.
So how much time should travellers leave before they depart, domestically and then internationally?
Well, look, I think domestic's pretty straightforward still. It's not any more complicated than it used to be. You just have a few things organised before you get to the airport, so the work can be done at home, not at the airport. So domestic, I think, is as it always has been. For international, I think give yourself an extra half an hour or so just to make sure that you've got plenty of time, there's no extra stress, and you're organized and ready for the things that you know you're going to need.
And what's it like in the cabin now? I imagine there's been more cleaning and sanitization procedures rolled out.
There are many safety protocols that we've put in place on top of the fact that we've got very well filtered air. So the natural filtration system on an aircraft does its job in terms of cleaning the air, so that's great. That's a first step. That's a natural part of flying. And then we do deep cleans every night, the turns every time we turn an aircraft, so every time people leave and then before they come back on, there's a light clean that takes place. And then our staff, of course, are all masked, all vaccinated, and they're all very well trained in personal hygiene for the COVID era. So it really couldn't be any more safe. It's probably one of the safest environments you'll find yourself in a day-to-day environment.
So when we start to see new variants like Omicron flare up, do we see prices start to come down?
No, I think the reality is that demand goes up and down depending upon the day of week and time of the year, and then there's some things that happen that kind of cause people to be a little bit more worried. And so we can see those fluctuations in demand, but it pops back pretty quickly because we all feel confident as a community. We've done our bit, we're all well vaccinated, we've got the highest vaccination rates of almost any country in the world. So we're well prepared to learn how to live with COVID, and we'll take the new news as it comes and we'll digest it, and then we'll get back to living our lives.
How are you handling cancellations? What's your policy?
We've got very flexible policies now, and we probably will have for some time. So you can cancel a flight, you can move your flight, and you can do that without penalty. And that's just the right thing to do as long as we're in this period where we're transitioning to living with COVID and we're learning how to manage the ups and downs that come with that.
So do you offer cash or credits, and how long do the credits last?
The credits last for at least a year, and it depends on the type of fare that you bought. If you bought a flexible fare, then it's refundable for cash, and if you didn't, then it's refundable for credit, and then that credit is very flexible. And we'll continue to be super flexible with our guests because we appreciate the fact that none of us can control what's going on around us, and circumstances change. Our policies were set at a point in time when we had a view on what the world looked like going forward. It's never been right, and so we'll continue to adjust and make sure that we've been hugely generous with our guests and give them plenty of time to use any credits that they have.
So give me a sense, if I travel overseas and Australia closes the border, is my flight going to be cancelled? What happens?
Well, I don't think we're going backwards as a country. I think the borders are open now, and the government's giving us all a lot of confidence that the borders are staying open for the vaccinated. And so I just think that's where we are now. We've progressed, we're not going backwards, and we have to continue to adjust to the changing circumstances. So maybe you've got a few days of isolation, maybe that's reduced, maybe that increases. We'll just all have to stay a bit flexible.
So what's the hot destination at the moment? Where are people heading to?
Well, look, Queensland's a very hot spot. Most of Australia Victoria and New South Wales have had challenges getting to Queensland for the last several months, and so Queensland's top of the list for many people. Melbourne, Gold Coast, Melbourne, Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney are very, very popular destinations at the moment, as is Maroochydore and Cairns up into Queensland.
And are you finding that travel is being driven by family and friends reuniting?
It's actually both business and family and friends reuniting. People getting back to relationships, connecting with colleagues, small businesses getting back in the game directly with their clients and colleagues around the country. Plus, it's the heartfelt family and friends reconnecting.
Jayne Hrdlicka, thank you so much for your time. Thank
Pleasure.
you.
It's nice to be here.
Australians are being urged to check the cancellation policies on short-term rental accommodation. There are no fixed rules on refunds, leaving many consumers out of pocket during lockdowns. We asked Amelia Terzon to investigate the fine print. In this quaint coastal town, short-term rentals are in peak demand over summer. Glenys Beebe is preparing the unit out the back of her house for guests.
Welcome to our Airbnb, Amelia.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
The Airbnb is the retiree's side hustle, and it involves a lot of work.
Homemade jam. It gets a little annoying because we could go out for lunch and then I'm sitting on my phone answering emails. Since the start of COVID, we've had 76 cancellations, which equated to 194 nights.
Her cancellation policy is flexible.
Basically, everyone gets a refund up until 24 hours before check-in. With COVID, we abolished that 24 hours before check-in.
While some hosts like Glenys have full refund policies, even during COVID, there is no blanket rule from the company Airbnb. And that means that some hosts won't give you any of your money back, even if you have to cancel due to a border closure. Ross Matheson didn't pay much attention to his host's fine print before booking a cottage in August.
I hadn't realised that the host's cancellation policy was what you get, and there's no consumer law to override that.
Ross and his partner were caught out by a snap lockdown and received this from their host.
Ross, people are still coming up to the cottage, no need to cancel. I rather took exception to that suggestion, that we break the law just to keep our booking.
They never got their money back and have since cancelled their Airbnb account. The reason why some people are getting refunds and others aren't is because websites like Airbnb and their competitors Stays and Ripperide are third-party providers. And that means they just give their hosts cancellation policies to pick from, and then consumers are urged to read the fine print. Airbnb is worth $150 billion. It makes money from service fees when people make bookings.
What we find tricky in this situation is that Airbnb might take money for making the booking itself, but when it comes to actually mediating in the cancellation, they tend to take a step back,
leaving some hosts to chase refunds. Airbnb declined an interview and wouldn't say how much in service fees from cancelled bookings it's held on to during the pandemic. Its competitor Stays confirmed it's not refunding its fees. Some short-term rental providers are drawing a line. The company that manages this luxury villa and works in partnership with Airbnb doesn't offer automatic refunds for COVID cancellations. Instead, it offers customers a credit note and then charges them to reschedule their booking.
The majority of people that are holding credits now, they booked knowing that COVID was a thing, and they booked knowing what the COVID cancellation terms were.
The company manages 300 properties and has had to take on more staff to handle cancellations. It would like more regulation when it comes to refunds.
I would definitely support a blanket policy. I think it's really challenging for businesses to try to navigate these things themselves.
A challenge Australian consumer law regulators are trying to tackle.
From holiday homes to hotels, operators are hoping you won't want or need to cancel your stay. The industry is forecast to grow 11% a year for the next 5 years. So let's go and find out what Australia's biggest hotel operator is doing to win back guests. Simon, hi.
How are you?
Let's go. Well, it's a beautiful outlook up here. This is amazing.
It is amazing. It's a beautiful skyline.
Mm-hmm. Simon McGrath, thanks for talking to us.
A pleasure.
How different is it staying in a hotel now as compared to how it was before the pandemic?
Look, I think the experience is one of probably higher expectation from customers, because they're, with the research our customers are telling us is they're desperate to travel again, and they're excited. I think the actual experience internally probably mirrors that to some degree. We've got employees that are back and they're excited about being together. They're excited about the service element. There's safety elements that are relevant, not just within hotels, but within our wider community, and they're reflective of the operations within a hotel.
And when you talk about those customer standards, when it comes to hygiene, what are hotels doing to meet those expectations?
Look, I mean, hotels were, throughout the region were always clean, but I can assure you post-COVID, they've never been cleaner, and that's a good thing. I think there's some elements post-COVID in our society that will stay, and that's one of them. And I think operationally, there's a degree of care around that, and guests will see that visually. That will give them a lot of comfort, and they can rely on that.
In ensuring those standards are met, does that mean you have to put on extra staff? Is it built into the cost, or is it being passed on to?
Yeah, no. The usual operating costs of a hotel remain, and but those cleaning services, then the quality of cleaning, as I said, would have been in place previously. They're probably far more accurate. We've got better knowledge and resources and there's been more advice from sort of the medical industry about what to do. So it's reallocating the right resources in the right spot to make sure that we maintain a level of safety for our guests as they require.
One of the issues for the industry has been staff shortages. What do customers have to expect in that regard? Do they need to be more patient?
Yeah, no, look, I think customers can expect a high level of service. There are staff shortages, and that will sort of separate the haves and the have-nots. There'll be employers that, you know, have maintained their staff, have stayed engaged, and have cared for their staff, and then subsequently have a high level of training, and they'll open up and they'll do a good job, you know. And I think customers can expect, you know, a great experience, and they can enjoy that experience. There will be others that will be under pressure, there's no doubt, and I think that, you know, that's going to be, you know, for the industry, that's going to be important to make sure that, you know, we focus on training and looking after our employees, and I think that's the opportunity ahead.
Has it been difficult to recruit new staff and retain current ones? What are you doing to attract employees?
Yeah, look, no doubt. I mean, people in a COVID world in any industry have looked for safety, and, you know, the tourism industry has burnt the brunt of the pressure of COVID, and it's done a great job. It's cared for quarantine guests, and it has been impacted the most. So no doubt, you know, many of our employees have run to higher ground in other industries and sought safety, but I can tell you what the feedback we're getting from those employees is that they do miss tourism and hospitality. They want to get back into it, and I think as you see the industry unfold over the next 6 months, it will show a level of confidence and security, and that will attract people back in. There is a void at the moment where there's naturally some pressure on that. But as I said, you know, the strong employers and the good employers are seeing a return to that level of loyalty by their employees.
Well, the Omicron variant has thrown up some nerves for consumers across the board. Have cancellations been an issue for you, and what is your cancellation policy? Yeah, look, we've been very surprised by the lack of cancellations. It's been very strong. The bookings still continue. I think the Omicron element or strain has been balanced by border openings, and I think there's a level of confidence in the community. Our cancellation policies have been friendly to our loyalty members, and they've been able to rely on that, and there's been flexibility in that. That's well embedded into our business now. So do you offer refunds in cash or credits? It depends on the actual case, you know, and the border. I mean, there's no one set rule for refunds because there's no one set level of government on, you know, border closure and so on. But it's a mixture of those combinations that gives our loyalty members comfort, and they've given us feedback that they enjoy that. And when it comes to price, does bad news mean lower prices in that there's less demand when there's concern about a new variant or COVID rising? Yeah, no, I think, I mean, essentially the hotels are well priced for the market, and yes, right across the industry. I think high demand has meant that, you know, in some cases there will be less discounts in peak areas, and you'll see that in leisure areas. In some areas where we're trying to animate the cities, you might get some great bargains, and look forward to that, and, you know, that'll be matched with entertainment and theatre events and cultural events that come into the city. So, you know, it'll be, as it's always been in any industry, a demand and supply issue. And you operate across Australia and New Zealand. Where are you seeing the greatest demand? Where are customers choosing to go? Oh, look, overwhelmingly, the first phase has been into leisure areas. What our customers tell us, and the research shows us, is that they want to meet family and friends again, and they want to take a break. They're the first two elements that's going to come out. Following on from that will be, you know, events, business, travel, and so if you follow that thought process, it's in leisure destinations. Noosa, Cairns, you know, Queenstown, all those destinations are very, very strong. The cities are now starting to get reimagined and opened, and that's going to be very beneficial for us as well. Simon McGrath, thank you. Thank you. Take care. Australia's biggest tourist market, China, is worth $12 billion, but there are doubts about if or when Chinese visitors will return, with warnings the majority of Chinese citizens won't fly out of the country unless the destination has 0 new COVID cases. Here's Samuel Yang.
It's eerily quiet in the Yarra Valley, a wine destination for many visitors from overseas. This 300-seat restaurant, once bustling with tour groups before the pandemic, is virtually empty.
After COVID, because border closed, our international visitation went down to 0.
Many of the visitors came from China.
They are very high-end spenders, so when they come here, they spend a lot on our top-range wines. So pandemic definitely impact our business.
In Perth, travel agent Steve Song is also feeling the pinch. He says his travel agency was booming pre-pandemic, hosting up to 3,000 guests from China each year.
Without the international visitors from China, it's very hard to survive.
And it's going to get harder. A survey suggests 83% of people in China will only travel to countries with zero COVID cases, and 72% are unwilling to fly due to safety concerns. Tourism Minister Dan Tian says Australia is one of the safest destinations in the world, and Chinese tourists will be welcomed back when the medical advice says it's safe to do so. The Therapeutic Goods Administration has recognized 2 Chinese-manufactured vaccines, paving the way for the return of Chinese international students. But community leaders worry the industry is not ready to welcome visitors back.
We're not really well equipped to cater for the return of the tourists at the moment. A lot of the shops and restaurants that cater for tourists, a lot of them are no longer around, and they don't even have enough staff to cater for a high volume of patrons or customers.
In Sydney, Justin Steele is still offering bilingual tours around Chinatown. He started his business in 2018, attracting young Chinese millennials.
I was really excited for 2020, and those first few months of the year were looking really good, and then everything just ground to a halt.
Justin grew up studying Chinese language and culture and was awarded a scholarship to China to improve the cultural exchange among young Australians. With high vaccination rates, he hopes a travel bubble will open up between the 2 countries.
Despite all the politics and stuff, Australians still have this reputation as being a very friendly, welcoming people. So I think Chinese tourists will come back, whether it's in the same numbers as pre-pandemic. I'm not sure. Let's hope.
And he says even then, it might take a few years.
This 1 kilometre stretch of sand isn't just a sought-after Instagram post, it's a magnet for backpackers and holidaymakers as one of Australia's biggest tourism drawcards. But 2022 is rewriting the rules on taking a trip. So let's find out what's in store with the head of the Transport and Tourism Forum, Margie Osmond. Hi Margie, nice to see you. Let's go in. Should we go and find it? Absolutely. Margie Osmond, what a beautiful spot.
It really doesn't come much better than this.
What's your feeling about travel in 2022?
Oh, I think it's going to be a brave new world. I think Australians are going to embrace more of their own country, at least in the short to medium term, and research will be everybody's friend. You are going to have to look very carefully at all the rules before you travel.
Well, bringing in that research element, how important do you think that travel agents will be when it comes to booking travel?
I think travel agents are going to be the big winners out of the next 12 months. I think it's going to be a renaissance moment for the travel agents.
And you say a lot of people will be exploring Australia. What do you think people need to plan for when they're going to go on a holiday interstate?
Well, number one, they need to check the borders. They need to check what's required of them, even if those borders are open. So, for example, with Queensland, we're looking at a test 3 days before you leave, 72 hours. And once you get there, after you've got your border pass, you in fact need to have a test 5 days later just to make sure that you're still COVID-free. So there's going to be different rules in every state. So you really do need to check and take nothing for granted.
Chinese tourists and Japanese tourists have made up a huge proportion of visitors to Australia pre-pandemic. Do you think they're going to return to our shores in the numbers they were attending then?
I don't think Chinese tourists are going to return in those numbers anywhere in the world. And remember, at the moment, they're not actually able to travel. But having said that, it's the biggest tourism market in the world. Even if it only came back to half the level it was before, it would still be the biggest tourism market in the world. And I know Tourism Australia are doing huge work in China to make sure that we're as attractive as we ever were to the Chinese traveller.
Outside of China though, what other markets are tourism operators looking at?
Well, it's fabulous to see Qantas now flying directly into India again. Essentially, I think it's some of those potential markets like India, which have always been one of our biggest growth markets, and a number of other Asian countries that perhaps we haven't looked at previously as being big sources of travellers, who now have a massively increased middle class and have got the travel bug, even with COVID.
In terms of preparing for an influx of tourists, there have been huge job losses in the sector. Some operators have had to close their doors. Are they going to be ready for a resurgence in tourism, and how long will it take for them to get back to normal levels?
Being realistic, I don't think we're going to see a lot of leisure travellers before the second or third quarter of next calendar year. So you're looking at the middle of next year. Most of what we're seeing at the moment is visiting friends and family, people getting back together with ones they love, or international students who, my goodness, we desperately want to see back in the country. So from that point of view, we have a little bit of time, but not a huge amount of time, to actually make a dent in this skills problem, which is a global issue and not just a problem for the Australian tourism industry. Make no mistake, it's going to take years for the industry to recover, but we will bounce back.
What kind of threats or risks does the new Omicron variant throw up, and particularly if we start to see more variants emerge?
Look, uncertainty is now the only certainty. I think the biggest issue for all of us is to work with government to create a standard response so that we know in a given set of circumstances exactly this will happen, government will require exactly this, and this will be the way we will communicate. I think the challenge we now have is to create that certainty for operators and really for travellers. They need to know exactly what's going to happen, particularly for domestic travellers, who we are going to continue to rely upon for many months yet to come.
Margie Osman, thank you so much for your time.
Entirely my pleasure, and how lucky are we to be here.
And that's all from our Summer Series special on travel and tourism. For more of our business specials, you can jump onto iView. I'm Alicia Barry. Thanks for watching.